Welcome to another episode of Eberhart Outdoors. This one's going to be what I think is probably the most important video you could watch because the information in it will lead you to a lot more success. And this video is going to be on postseason scouting. We're just going to be talking about it. We're not going to be physically doing it yet because it's mid-February and there's a ton of snow on the ground, and we're going to continue to get more. But postseason scouting is very, very important, and I'm going to tell you and show you a little bit of the reasons why in a couple of video clips. For all three of the books my son Chris and I wrote, we did statistics on just about everything. You know, licensed hunters per state, land mass per state, P&Y entries per state, ratio of P&Y entries per licensed hunters per state in all three of those books. And one stat that rang out very true to me, 55 to 65% of the bucks entered in the record book were taken during that state's rut phases. So obviously, if that high a percentage of bucks are taken during a 4-week time frame from pre-rut to the end of post-rut, that's where you need to spend your attention on. And basically, those rut phases, late October through late November, you know, those are the three rut phases, pre, peak, and post, for all of those states. All the way to, I talked to a guy in Oklahoma yesterday, and his rut phases were exactly the same. He was in northern Oklahoma. So Oklahoma up through, you know, Missouri, Iowa's, Kansas's, Michigan's, throughout the Northeast, all the way over to the East Coast, Pennsylvania, Kentucky. All those states pretty much share the same rut phase time frames. And during those times of year, at least up throughout the Midwest and the Northeast, the foliage is going to be down. So, you know, you're looking at the area exactly the way it's going to look when the foliage is down, when you actually go hunt it during the rut phases. But you want to make sure that you wait until the snow melts, and I'm going to have videos of that on this particular segment. And as soon as you start to get any depth of snow, deer actually will change where they bed. You know, they'll go bed in lower lying areas where they're out of the cold winds. They'll lay bed under pine trees or cedar trees where the snow is going to pretty much catch up on the pines because they still have, you know, their needles. That way the snow is not as deep underneath the canopy of those. And they're just going to move closer to preferred feeding areas. You know, there's areas where they will move, you know, 15 to 20 miles in the winter. In the Upper Peninsula and in northern Wisconsin, a lot of the northern states, they will move to yarding areas and totally change all the patterns that they would have been doing in the fall during the actual deer season and rut phases. So the sign that you see in the snow when you go out scouting, if you scouted when there was snow on the ground, is 100% meaningless. So you need to wait until the snow is gone before you start your, what I termed years ago as postseason scouting. But I think postseason scouting is really critical to success. And these are the main reasons why. Advantages of postseason scouting. You can scrutinize every single inch of the property you're scouting with as many visits as you want. You can go in there from daylight till dark for 2 weeks in a row if you're on a large piece of public land. I'm being a little bit facetious here. But you can just beat the crap out of it because spooking deer at that time of year means absolutely nothing. The deer will be way back in their normal routines well before season. So during postseason, you can scrutinize every inch of the property without fear of spooking deer. Obviously in preseason, you got to walk on pins and needles and try not to spook deer because that will affect their daytime movements, you know, during season. Most mature bucks that are 3.5 years old and older, at least in heavily pressured areas, as soon as there's an influx in human activity, you know, they take on more nocturnal movements and don't move outside of the security cover of their bedding areas during daylight. Very rarely do they do that. Once in a while you might get a first day or two opportunity to mature buck that is still in his daytime summer routine, but that's a very rare thing in a heavily pressured area where there's a lot of other hunters doing their preseason scouting, and location preparation prior to season. Secondly, bedding areas. I am a huge advocate, especially during the rut phases, of hunting the interiors of bedding areas. I struggle to comprehend how people can keep bedding areas as sanctuary areas. Unless you own a huge piece of property where you have total control of a mature buck's core area, keeping bedding areas as sanctuary areas to me is kind of foolish. Let's say you own 60 acres and you had a 5-acre really nice dense bedding area and you knew there was a good buck in it. He's not residing on your little 5-acre bedding area all of the time during the rut phases or during any part of the season. He's going to, especially during the rut phases when he's in pursuit of estrus does, he's going to leave your area. And the odds of him getting shot on a bordering piece of property, especially during gun season, are very high, or even during bow season. So not hunting the interiors of bedding areas during the rut phases, which is where the bucks push does into to do their breeding, not hunting in their bedrooms is a big mistake. So during postseason, you can go in there and you can literally rape the bedding areas. You can spook all the deer out of it. Doesn't make any difference. Days in a row, scout it, prep locations, and get that done. And then you totally leave that alone until you're going to hunt it during season. And typically interiors of bedding areas you should probably totally leave alone until you start hunting them during pre-rut in late October. So from the time you finish prepping them prior to spring green up, during your postseason, as soon as you finish that, the next time you go in there should be probably during the early pre-rut with your bow in hand for an all-day sit. So that's another thing. You can totally scrutinize the interiors of bedding areas. Trees. When you're scouting this time of year, during postseason, as soon as the snow melts, all the foliage is going to be down. So when you find a location that you want to hunt, you can prep the tree according to how it looks at that time. Because the foliage is going to be down during the rut phases and the foliage is going to be down now. So, if you go out and you pre-season scout and you find a tree and it's full of leaves, all the background trees are full of leaves, you may end up setting it up at 16 to 18 feet to your saddle position, and then once you go back there and hunt it during the rut phases, you're exposed. You're totally exposed in the open because there's no leaves in the tree you're hunting and there's no leaves in the background. So you're just a big blob sticking off the side of a tree. Fortunately, with a saddle, you can use the tree trunk and maneuver around the tree on your ring of steps to not get picked. But it's still being up there higher, out of their peripheral vision. When you're looking at it during postseason, you're going to say, okay, I need to be up 25, 22, 23 feet to my feet instead of 16 or 18 feet, like I might set it up during, pre-season when there's foliage on everything. Another thing, you're looking at the area, the entire area where you're walking, you're looking at it the same way it's going to look during the rut phases. So you're looking at what the security cover will look like during the rut phases. When you go out and you pre-season scout, everything looks dense. All the vegetation is leafed out, the bushes are leafed out, brush is leafed out, all the weeds are standing straight up. Everything looks dense. So a lot of times you'd set something up for a rut phase location and you set it up during pre-season and then you go back there during the rut phases and it doesn't have the adequate security cover around the kill zone or in a transition area from a bedding area to that location for a mature buck to visit it during daylight hours. Yeah, when you set it up during pre-season, it looked like it was plenty thick enough everywhere for a mature buck to transition to it. But once that foliage is down, things change. Deer habits change. What they move through changes. They don't move through the same stuff they do pre-season as than they do during the rut phases, because the security cover takes on a totally different look during the rut than it did during preseason. So you're looking at the area exactly the way it's going to look when you go back to hunt it during the rut phases. The previous season's buck sign, once the snow melts, is still very, very visible. It's going to look exactly like it did before it started snowing in the first place. So scrapes, scrape lines, runways are going to be obvious. Because you're shortly after the previous deer season, you're going to easily be able to identify rubs from older rubs, or you're going to be able to easily identify licking branches over scrapes, because they're going to be freshly nipped off and still white. So again, you have to wait for the snow to melt before you can actually go in and look at that type of sign. When there's snow on the ground, you can't see scrapes, they're covered up. You can't see last fall's runways because they're covered up and the deer aren't using them anymore. Things just change drastically from when there's snow on the ground to when there's not. So the available sign that you can see when the snow is gone is far different from the sign you can see when there is snow. And I'm going to show that, you will see in the video. Runways leading to and away from your location. During the winter in most of the Midwest and the northern states, especially when you do get snow, a lot of times you'll get freezing rains. My son 2 days ago got freezing rain. 600,000 people were out of power. Well, what freezing rains do is it breaks a lot of branches. It knocks down trees that are dead. That's just a lot of extra weight. So when you go to your locations, even locations that you've already had prepped, you're not necessarily scouting, you go back to your old locations and you walk all the runways and you clear out all the dead debris that may have fallen or tipped over and blocked your runways. You always want to keep those runways for 50 to 100 yards in each direction. You always want to keep those runways as clear as you can, because again, when you're hunting heavily pressured areas, your runways are typically through some semblance of security cover, the ones that you're going to be hunting for a mature buck for daytime movements. It's not going to be out through an open woodlot like you see on TV, on that zoo type stuff. You're actually going to have to know how to hunt, and you're going to be down in the security cover. So keeping those runways clear is a big, big deal. And there's almost always, I can't ever remember a time when I've visited an area that's got 3 or 4 runways leading to my location where I haven't picked up or had to throw or had to cut deadfall. And you can cut deadfall on public land. You can't cut live stuff, but you can definitely cut deadfall. A lot of times you can take an electric chainsaw and you can cut a section of a tree that's fell across a runway. You can cut a 2 or 3 foot wide section of it out and throw that block of wood off to the side and open up that runway. Because a lot of times when trees fall, they're too high for fawns and stuff to go over, so they don't go over it and they reroute maybe around to a runway that's not going by your tree. So keeping those runways open is a big deal. You can also change and alter runways during postseason. You can actually, if there's a runway, let's say 35 yards, I'm a 25-yard guy, but most guys are very capable with a compound of shooting 35 yards. So if there's a runway that's slightly out of your comfort distance shooting wise, and it's going paralleling your tree, it's not necessarily coming to your tree, you can actually take brush, some of the brush that's just laying around, debris in the area, and you can block that runway off, maybe where you've got a 20-yard gap in that runway near where your tree is, and then reroute a runway, a slight gradual reroute, and then connect it back to the runway on the other side, on the opposite, just past where you blocked it off. So you're blocking it off, but you're creating a new runway just prior to where you blocked it off that's going to skirt within your shooting distance, and then go over and connect to that runway again just after the spot where you had blocked it off. So you can alter runways, and by doing that during postseason, that route that starts to use that runway becomes habit by fall. They're going to be traveling those runways for 4 to 6 months prior to season, so it will become habitual to them to use that altered runway that you made. And you always have to keep this in mind. Mature deer can't tell the difference between you scouting and you hunting. So whenever you're scouting during preseason, you are creating an influx of human activity in a woods or an area that probably hasn't had any activity since April, or maybe a little bit in May for turkey season. So from the end of the previous deer season, a lot of times it's in January or even mid-February, as late as I know seasons go. From that time until deer season that fall, there has been pretty much zero human activity, other than maybe a tad bit of turkey hunting. Mature deer, they can recognize when there is an influx of human activity, and mature bucks especially, they know what that means. If they're 3.5 years old, or even 2.5 years old in a heavily pressured area, they went through 1 or 2 bow and gun seasons. And they know when there's an influx of human activity, that equates to danger. That is a threat to their existence. And they take on a lot more nocturnal habits, other than maybe a little bit of daytime movement in their bedding areas. They just don't move much outside of their bedding areas during daylight hours. They're usually transitioned into the bedding areas well before daylight, a half hour to an hour before daylight, and they don't usually leave the bedding area until about a half hour after daylight. So don't forget that. Deer don't know the difference. They don't know you're just out there scouting and looking around. They think you're a threat to their existence. They think you're trying to kill them because that's what they know from their past. So anyway, this is going to be, I'm just going to go out in the field and show you a woods. I'm going to walk through the woods in the snow and show you some buck rubs and show you that there's absolutely no tracks in the snow whatsoever in an area where there was a lot of deer activity in the fall. Obviously the buck rubs wouldn't be there if there wasn't any activity, and there's also, it's kind of brushy areas, so it's kind of on the edges of somewhat would have been security cover in the fall. But the deer have totally moved from there because it's not close to a food source. They've moved closer to preferred food sources and into lower ground where they're out of the wind. And then I also go out and film a cornfield. And this is a picked cornfield that was picked by a farmer that does an excellent job of picking corn. So there was very minimal corn left on the ground after he picked it. And what little corn was left on the ground got mowed up before we even got snow. So by the time we got snow, that corn was totally consumed. So I'm going to go along the back edge of this cornfield, where in the fall there was tons and tons of deer traffic coming out into this cornfield. In fact, I actually showed a video of it where I had deer around me pretty much the whole time. And so I went out there and I filmed, walked the edge of the bedding area, the bedding brush on the one side of the cornfield, and then the actual picked cornfield itself, just to show you there wasn't one set of tracks in probably a 200-yard zone going from that bedding area to that cornfield. So that's, those are both the timber as well as the ag. Those are both just proving that when there's snow on the ground, don't waste your time scouting, because a lot of the scouting efforts you do in the snow are going to be absolutely meaningless for next fall's movement. You're just wasting your time. Now, I will say this. If it's during season, and let's say you are tagged out, okay? You filled your bow tag, or in Michigan you'd have had to fill both of your bow tags, or you filled a bow tag and a gun tag. If that is the case, and after the gun season ends, there is snow on the ground, but it's still bow season, it's going into the late bow season. If you like hunting during the late season, I would recommend going out there when the snow is on the ground and scouting for late season locations in the future, because obviously after gun season, deer are bedded as deep into the crap as they could possibly be. So when you cut tracks or cut runways, follow them back until you bump them. Don't worry about even bumping them. Follow them all the way back until you find out where they're bedding. You may bump them far enough ahead where you never see them, but if you follow the tracks, you are going to come to beds, and the beds are going to be in bedding areas, unless it's nighttime beds and they're out in an open area where they were feeding at night. You always want to follow them back in the direction of the heavy cover, because that's where they're going to be bedding during the daytime. And then you could potentially set up locations at that time after the snow melts, you can go back in and actually prep locations for seasons to come, as far as hunting late season after gun season, because they're going to be bedding in those same areas year after year during gun season and shortly thereafter. And also keep in mind, anytime you're going to be hunting a location like that, it has to be a morning sit. Otherwise you'd spook them with your entries in the evening. But if there's snow on the ground, or if there is no snow during the future late seasons, you still have to make sure you are in your tree at minimum an hour and a half before daybreak, settled in and quiet, because you got to get there before they do. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and hey, good luck.
We've had some snow several days ago, and I'm just out here walking through the woods just to show people this woods had a lot of deer traffic in it in the fall. You got security cover over there. There's just literally no deer sign here right now. When you start getting deep snow and you're in a timbered area, deer change where they reside. They change where they bed. Right here, check this out. This is proof that there was deer activity in the fall. There's 2 buck rubs right there. In the winter, when you get deep snows, it's very common for deer to move out of their dense bedding areas or out of open timber where they were feeding and there was acorns. It's very common for deer to move totally out of the area and move down into lower lying zones where they're out of the cold winds from the winter. They're more protected. And that's exactly what has happened here. As you can see out there through that woods, there's nothing. There is no sign of deer here at all. And this snow has been on the ground for probably 4 days. There's snow on the trees because we haven't had any wind, and it's been mid-20s. So that snow is still on the trees. So this is just to verify why, when you're going to do some post-season scouting, you wait until the snow melts, because sign in the snow can be very misleading to where the deer traffic is in the fall, because there was a lot of deer traffic going through this zone in the fall. You can tell just by the security cover. There you go, there's some more buck rubs right there. Another little buck rub right there. It's a little guy. Oh, there's another one right there. So this is proof positive there were definitely deer here in the fall. I think I've already proven that. But they just are not here now. You can just tell by this brush. This was dense in the fall. There's plenty of security cover where deer were moving through here. That's why the rubs are here. But they are gone. Totally devoid of this area. So scouting, if you were to scout this property and you didn't see any tracks here in the snow, you'd think deer don't come here. And that's just not the truth. That's just not the facts. Just keep this in mind. Wait for the snow to melt when you're going to do your postseason scouting, because sign left in the snow is extremely misleading. I hunt here. This area was loaded with deer last fall. This area had a lot of deer last fall. Right there's a buck rub. He trashed that little tree, pine tree right out. Broke it right off. And right there's a tree I hunt from. That big red oak. I've actually had that in videos before. This is several days after snow. There's a big runway that comes right down through there, just to the left of that log you can see down there on the ground, covered with snow. There's not a track in it. There's a buck rub. That's on another runway. Some more buck rubs right down there. There's some other buck rubs right down there. This is just showing that sign in the snow is not conducive to fall traffic. There was deer coming out here every day in the fall. Every day there was deer coming out, crossing that river from that bedding area, coming out here into this standing cornfield. And even when it was picked, they were coming out after dark. So there was a lot of traffic. This right here is a runway. You can see where it dishes out right here in this hill. Right down there, right across the river. But there's no tracks here at all. And again, this snow's been on the ground for days. We got a couple of good days of snow, and then we got a freezing rain that made it crunchy on top. The point is, there's just no sign of deer traffic here. This corn, when it was picked, the guy that picks it does a really good job, cleans it up really good, so there wasn't a lot of corn left on the ground. So they're just not coming out here in the winter into this particular pick cornfield. Yet they were coming out here very frequently every day in the fall. As soon as the snow is gone, all the runways, there's scrapes under that pine, there's scrapes under that big red oak, all that stuff will be very visible again. So you'll be able to see where last fall's scrapes were. And right now there's just no activity whatsoever. They've moved. The deer have totally 100% left this area. I don't know where they're at. I don't think they're on this property. There's some big stands of pines to the south, and I'm sure that's where they're at, because there's crop fields down there as well. Plus there's more browse. As you can tell here, there's not even a whole lot to browse on. So keep that in mind. Always wait till the snow melts before you do your postseason scouting, so you can see all the sign that was left there from the fall, and you can see the runways. They're very active. Right now you can't tell anything, nothing whatsoever.
If interested, the links to many of the podcasts I've been on, or for information about my 2-day whitetail workshops that take place in March and April, please visit my website at deer-john.net. Thank you for watching another episode of Eberhart Outdoors, and to receive notifications for future videos, please subscribe.